Good evening and welcome to this emergency broadcast, which is coming from Students for Life Action's GOP for Life project. I'm Kristi Hamrick. I'm the Vice President for Media and Policy of Students for Life of America, Students for Life Action. We have more than 1,400 groups in all 50 states. We've trained more than 200,000 pro-life activists who are working right now in this election cycle. And the pro-life generation is very engaged with having a home for our vote. And that is why we're involved with GOP for Life. We are very privileged to have some special guests coming up. But GOP for Life is a nationwide effort to remind the Republican Party about what Ronald Reagan so clearly articulated, that there are three legs to the conservative stool which hold up the foundation of this party in terms of activism. There are national security conservatives, there are economic conservatives, and there are social conservatives. Take one of those away, and the stool that holds up the party infrastructure and the grassroots really collapses. This is in part a get out the vote effort. Every vote will count. But it is also because we are trying to issue a clarion call to the Republican Party that we want a home for the pro-life vote. We're not voting R first, we're voting P. We're voting pro-life. And as part of our effort, we have reached out to every RNC leader across the country. We have called into every RNC office and spoken with leaders all across the country as the platform committee gets underway. And we have now invited two excellent people to talk about what we're seeing. It's vital that we let the GOP know right now that we're interested in seeing pro-life values articulated. The platform isn't about one cycle or one person. It is an aspirational document for all those that make up the party. And you've seen a lot of the stories over the weekend in the New York Times and Washington Post. They're saying they might make it a shorter platform. The issue for us is not how long it is, but what is the intent? And does it intend to protect life? And we've seen just last week at the Supreme Court that the federal government has tremendous power over the issue of abortion, as in a case in which the Biden administration was trying to force abortion into Idaho emergency rooms. They were partially successful. That case will continue, as it was said that the federal government does have more power than the states when it comes to this kind of policy. So what are we going to do about that? We're going to ask some experts. First, let me introduce Kristan Hawkins. She's president of Students for Life Action, Students for Life America. After working in the Bush administration, she was recruited to take over a small organization, building it into the 20 million plus powerhouse that it is today, a C3, a C4, an emerging PAC. An organization that doesn't just reflect the interest of young pro-life activists on college and university campuses, although we have a tremendous foothold there. And in fact, right now we're on 40% of publicly funded college and university campuses, on the way to 100% in 5 years. Kristan has her ear to the ground when it comes to what are grassroots individuals saying about life and what are the most really passionate pro-life activists saying. Joining us is also Senator James Lankford, an experienced leader. He was first elected to the U.S. House and overwhelmingly won his U.S. Senate seat in 2014. He's been a voice of reason, an unflinching supporter of life, and a real leader on this. And we really appreciate him as chairman of the VAT committee. That's the Value Action Committee. And frankly, that's where a lot of the things that really impact values voters, like myself, like many of you watching. And so we want to hear from Senator Lankford on what the party officials are saying, and Kristan on how the grassroots are seeing it. Kristan, you spearheaded an effort to make sure that pro-life Americans have a voting home. Why did you have that concern?
Well, thank you, Kristi, for emceeing this important webcast tonight. I'm so thankful to all of you who've joined us from all over the country or watching it live or be watching the replay to kind of get marching orders. This is really important. As anyone who follows me knows, I am a student of history. The pro-life plank in the Republican Party wasn't always. It was a hard-won victory that folks like my mentor, Phyllis Schlafly, had to fight for years to see pro-lifers really have a home in the Republican Party. And that's where when you look at laws that are being passed, babies that are being saved, mothers served, where we really started to make monumental political progress as soon as pro-lifers were given a home, welcomed into the Republican Party. And so I knew immediately after Roe fell that we were going to see a fight. There's always a fight fight every 4 years when the platform committee reconvenes before the Republican National Convention, before the nomination of a party's presidential candidate is confirmed. It's always been a battle, but I knew it was going to be even more of a battle after Roe fell, where we started to see some of our friends in the Republican Party who had always said they were pro-life, who've had A+ voting record scores, suddenly start to change their tune on abortion when the media started saying abortion, being pro-life, was no longer popular and that there was going to be a backlash against voters. And so I think that's something that we've got to be very concerned about. And so we've started seeing and hearing rumors from those in the Trump campaign, those high up in the Republican Party, elected Republican Party officials in states saying, we've heard talk about potentially changing the platform this year. We saw it last week in a debate where President Trump said that he was not for a national abortion prevention act, that he believes abortion should be left to the states only. And I think that's a misreading of what the Dobbs decision actually did, because what Dobbs did, the Dobbs decision, which reversed Roe versus Wade, it didn't say abortion was simply a state's issue. It said the issue is now returned to the people and their representatives. That means federal, state, and local. And so we want to be very clear heading into this next Republican National Convention, which is happening in 2 weeks in Milwaukee, that the GOP delegates know and hear from us, the pro-life grassroots, that we demand a home in the Republican Party and that the platform remains 100% pro-life. That vision statement for where we as a pro-life movement want to be. Not necessarily, we know it may not happen in the next 4 years or even the next 8 years, but we emphatically agree that human life begins at conception and every human life is worthy of protection at that moment. They're protected in law as well as protected in service. So that's how we ended up at GOP for Life. We have a gopforlife.com tool we'll talk to you more about later, but that's where we got to where we are tonight.
Senator Lankford, what kind of pro-life vision do you think is being discussed behind closed doors in the GOP? And obviously this is not behind closed doors. And many of our friends in the media are on this call. Welcome. I've been talking to you all day. But I've also talked to RNC leadership across the country. I've spent the last week or so. And like I said, we've called into all 50 states, but you are on the inside. What do you see is at the heart of where the GOP is right now in terms of articulating a vision?
Yeah, so they're kind of all over the place in many ways. By the way, thanks for hosting this call to be able to talk about the issues that are extremely important, but there is not a consistent message right now among Republicans. We should begin with what was just stated by Kristan, and that is we believe in the value of every single person. We don't believe that some children are valuable and some children are disposable. We believe every child is valuable. And right now there's this national dialogue going on about, well, some children are just disposable, they're in the way, they're inconvenient, and so we'll set them aside and then we'll have convenient children later. That's just not what our value is. So we should always begin with the value that every single child is important to us. Every single child is important, and that value begins our core of who we are. So as you mentioned before, this Reagan perspective of national defense, economic freedom, and then also values of the value of every person. Those three groups have got to be able to merge together. And right now, the economic folks and the national defense folks are saying it's divisive, and I don't want to talk about the life issue because it's so noisy right now. I would tell you my push is we need to talk about it more, not less. So right now, there are Republicans that are saying this is only a state's issue. We shouldn't talk about it on the federal side. I think the core, when I talk to several of those Republicans, their core issue is, why are we fighting this on a national level? We don't have the votes to win it. We don't have 60 votes in the Senate. We don't have the majority that we need even in the House to be able to win this big of a vote to be able to change things. So let's just not discuss it at all. My push on that is, no, this is exactly the time to be able to keep talking about it. I'm keenly aware we don't have the 60 votes in the Senate, but the worst thing we can do is to not talk about it at all and somehow make people presume this is no longer a value, that we don't care about children anymore when we do care passionately about children. The way you win the argument is to keep talking about it, not to talk about it less. So right. As Republicans, we've got to have this national focus, talk about it or not talk about it. My focus is keep talking about it.
You know, and I love what you were just saying about the 60 votes, where people pretend like, Biden doesn't have 60 votes. You know, Javier Becerra, head of HHS, doesn't have 60 votes, and Merrick Garland at the Department of Justice certainly doesn't have 60 votes. But there's been a lot that the Biden administration, they really taught a master's class in the weaponization of government in terms of the viewpoint discrimination aimed at pro-life Americans. Kristan, I know weaponized government and confronting that for point discrimination is at the top of your agenda. What are you telling the GOP when it comes to what they can do without 60 votes? Because we might not have them anytime soon, although everybody watching vote to send Senator Lankford more help. But
that's exactly right. Yeah, I mean, you know, when you're thinking about, we've gotten a lot of calls in the past few days. What does the pro-life movement want to see in the platform? What would be our wish list of sorts? And it's been very clear at the top of the list is appointments. You know, personnel is your policy. I think that's a Reagan adage as well. And that's what we've seen so keenly and tragically with the Biden administration this past 4 years, where we have abortion activists heading up our entire departments of our US government. Javier Becerra, he's the head of HHS, my former employer, Health and Human Services. He's not a doctor, by the way. Javier Becerra is a lawyer. He's an activist, an abortion activist who's in charge of all of our health care. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable what we've seen. That tonight there are grandmas in their 80s sitting in federal penitentiary. There's actually more sentencings being possibly handed down tomorrow for having the audacity of praying in front of an abortion facility, while people who've taken over college campuses, vandalized, destroyed, have threatened the lives of our Jewish brothers and sisters are like walking free. And there's no punishment. But if you simply have the audacity to pray in front of an abortion facility, well, the Biden DOJ is going to come after you, and they're going to throw the book at you, and they're going to put you in federal prison. I mean, this is what we're talking about. We're thinking about the Food and Drug Administration, which is under HHS, how the Biden administration used the crisis of COVID to strip all of the REMS, the risk evaluation mitigation strategies, the common sense standards on prescribing these abortion pills to ensure at least women don't die, mothers don't die from taking them. They use the COVID crisis to get rid of all of these REMS, putting mothers across the country at risk, not to mention the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands of babies who are now dying from this leading cause of abortion. So when we're looking at the platform, we're looking at who is the president, who will be in charge of the presidential administration. As we all have tragically learned since last week's debate, we have an administration in charge of Washington, D.C., not a president. And that was made very clear. The people that Joe Biden appointed to serve are the ones actually keeping the trains running, as we've seen, and now as the White House has admitted. We want to make sure that there is an affirmation in the platform that life begins at conception, that the Republicans acknowledge that we are the party of science, and we acknowledge what science teaches us. We also want acknowledgement of the basic morality that all human life is valuable, because if you don't believe all human life is valuable, we're going to have problems in a lot of other policies, not just abortion. We also want to talk about cutting funds to Planned Parenthood. President Trump has, as I said earlier, has recently said he believes that the state should handle this issue, and it's not a federal issue. If President Trump really believes that, then we should challenge him to make sure we defund our nation's largest abortion vendor, Planned Parenthood, of more than $700 million taxpayer dollars, which commits more than a third of all abortions. Nearly 400,000 babies died inside of Planned Parenthoods last year. So we have a whole list, Kristi, as you can see, and I'll stop there, of what should be in the platform. But this is something, these are common sense values that even sometimes Republicans who maybe aren't fully pro-life should certainly agree we shouldn't be funding Planned Parenthood, who funds all the Democrats' campaigns, that commits the most amount of abortions, and is using our taxpayer dollars to do it.
Right. Senator Lankford, you were kind enough to let us come to your office a couple days ago and talk about this. How could you describe how the federal government has really weaponized policy against pro-life people, against conservatives such as yourself? We certainly saw an immunity hearing ruling today out of SCOTUS, looking at how the government has been weaponized. Is that something that's resonating with the GOP? Because if we're looking at all the ways in which the Biden administration, the Democratic Party, has abused their power, pro-lifers are at the front of that line, maybe not in front of President Trump, but at the front of that line. How would you describe what you see in Washington?
Yeah, if you say the federal government's not going to have a role in abortion, we're looking at what President Biden's doing that is the most pro-abortion president in American history. He's actively using every leverage in government to increase the number of abortions in America. And let me give an example for that. In my state of Oklahoma, our state law is we believe every child is valuable. We put that into state law. And so we don't have abortions that are happening in Oklahoma. So the federal government has now stepped in and they've taken away federal funding for AIDS testing, for cancer screenings, all those things that have typically come into our state. That's a part of every state gets some of this funding until our state agrees to put out on our state healthcare documents a 1-800 number of places where women could call to be able to get access to an abortion. Basically, the federal government is saying to my state, we're going to cut off AIDS testing, we're going to cut off cancer screening, we're going to cut off all these other healthcare things in your state if you don't promote abortion in your state. Our VA hospital has now become a place where people can go get abortions. That was not true just 3 years ago, but it's something this administration is actively advancing as ways they can increase the number of abortions and increase abortion access all over the country. Of course, we've all seen what the FDA has done to be able to advance abortions. And there's been a clear signal from Health and Human Services and Javier Becerra to say, if you're a healthcare provider and you have a moral objection to abortion, we will not protect your conscience rights from the federal government. We're going to allow your employer to run over you and compel you or say you're going to be fired from your job if you don't perform abortions. All these things were not true just 4 years ago. And these are ways that the federal government has activated to increase the number of abortions in America. And so that's why I say, when I hear anyone say this is not a federal issue, it certainly is a federal issue because this administration has found ways to be able to advance abortion.
It's astounding, really. What would you have us, the people who are listening, what would you like to hear the thousands of people, to be honest, that are going to be watching this, and it could be millions later when we get to YouTube? How would you tell them what they should say when they're talking to RNC leaders and when they're talking to legislators such as yourself? What do they need to hear?
So a couple of things, and again, this is going to sound like I'm just connecting to what y'all are doing on this, but the GOP for Life site is a great place to be able to go get information, to go activate and send a message to legislators and those delegates that are out there to the GOP convention to say, hey, this is really important to me. So I would encourage people to go to that site, the GOP for Life site, and that helps people kind of know what to do to be able to activate on that. Second thing is really clear. Continue to talk to legislators about their own personal views on life and to say, if that's a personal view for you, what are you doing to be able to speak out for me? Because that's also a personal view for me. I want my elected representatives to be able to articulate the value of every single child. And so that's a part of the conversation. And I'm keenly aware we don't have the votes right now. We see that Senator Schumer's running the Senate. Everyone kind of knows that Joe Biden is in the White House. We don't have the votes to be able to drive this. But you don't move hearts if you never talk about an issue. So if we're going to win votes one day, we've got to first win the hearts of people. And so keeping that dialogue going locally, talking to neighbors and family members about the value of that, and talking to elected representatives saying, keep sharing our message that every single child is valuable so that we can win the votes in the days ahead.
I was pretty encouraged when I was doing calls to RNC leaders across the country where everyone really did articulate a pro-life vision. But it's got to be a discouraging time. And I know we only have you for a short time. How can we pray for you and the people that you work with? Because it's a terrible burden. We see it, we understand it, and we appreciate your leadership on it. But how could we pray for y'all?
Yeah, that's really kind of you. I do remind people, and just make this quick comment. I have a lot of my Democrat senator colleagues that they will privately say they're privately opposed to abortion, but they're not going to impose their values on other people. The fear of this is if Republicans also take on that perspective to say, I'm going to be privately opposed to abortion, but I'm not going to speak out on this, we're losing the battle because we have fewer and fewer people articulating the basic value of life. So as you're praying for us and for members of Congress, myself, my own family, pray for safety, as many people have experienced their own threats based around just carrying this basic value of life. It's ironic that those of us that carry the message of life and the value of people face unique threats on that. Second thing is boldness for individuals to be able to speak out, not just privately what they believe, but also publicly to be able to articulate that message. There are also people that they're just not good at talking about this. They get really uncomfortable talking about the issue of abortion in life because it's painful to be able to talk about. So just praying for opportunities for them to have private conversations that help them practice in larger public conversations, and so they're comfortable at that moment. And if you know legislators, to be able to be in that dialogue. So pray for wisdom for the moment. This is one of those moments that those of us that are Christians are always seeking God to say, tell us the right thing to say and the right way to say it. That was Jesus' statement when he said, the Father told me what to say and how to say it. So I think it's important that we also say the right thing the right way so that we're actually winning hearts, not just expressing our anger and frustration.
Right. So the time is now to go to GOP for Life. We're in a real short window, aren't we?
We are.
Senator Lankford, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you coming on and taking some time, and really for the help up on Capitol Hill. We might not have 60 votes, but we're still moving the ball forward.
We are. We're still talking about continuing to be able to pray because every child matters in this, and we'll continue to articulate that.
That's exactly right. Well, thank you for joining us. I know we have to let you go, and then I'm going to bother Kristan with a couple more questions because she doesn't.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you both.
Yeah. So, Kristan, we're in a crunch time.
Yes.
People do need to go to GOP for Life. They need
GOPforlife.com.
.com. You need to be emailing your RNC members. If you know them, text it them, call them, write them. The platform committee starts soon. There's going to be 112 members of the platform. We've reached out to RNC leadership across the country. I would tweet and call and reach out to the Trump campaign as well, and to President Trump himself to let him know that what you want. But I think importantly, Kristan, do you see that we're having some movement? I know I see it, but there is no doubt that if we're quiet now, we really will get the nothing that we didn't ask for.
That's right. I mean, I think this is why some people are saying, well, why do you care about the GOP platform? It's just one small battle. And there's all these battles going on. The platform is a vision statement for decades to come. If pro-lifers lose their home in the Republican Party, and it reshapes all the Republican candidates from the U.S. Senate to the U.S. House down to your state and local leaders, your legislators, we're not going to have advocates, passing and introducing legislation to protect mothers and children from the predatory abortion industry. I think that's why it's so important. You don't hear a lot about this, but this is a critical battle. I think, and to be honest with you, Kristi, I think it's the biggest external threat we face right now. The good news is people are listening. The Trump campaign is listening. We've had multiple conversations with the Trump campaign since February over this issue. They're hearing us. That's why we're having this call tonight, because we need it to be just more than Kristi and Kristan calling all of the state leaders. We need you to get involved. And if you go to GOPforlife.com, you can immediately email in like 30 seconds your state GOP leaders, telling them and demanding that those that they nominate to serve on the platform committee in 2 weeks in Milwaukee are pro-life, and keep the pro-life platform intact at the RNC. We are in a difficult point in American history. That's, it's undeniable. The silver and gray hairs just keep stacking up in my hair. There's been so much to do since the fall of Roe, but are we in a better spot today than we were June 24th, 2022? Absolutely, we are. Hands down. We've seen Oklahoma, West Virginia, Indiana move to practically end all abortions. Wyoming was the first state to pass our Chemical Abortion Prevention Act, banning chemical abortions in our state. South Carolina, we just won 3 critical primary races of 3 GOP women who betrayed us, killed our life at conception bill, who all 3 lost this June in their primaries. And the very liberal Guardian, I believe it was the Guardian, a British newspaper, said, that's it, abortion will be banned now in South Carolina because these 3 GOP pro-choice women lost their races. So we're absolutely seeing progress. The heartbeat law was gone into effect in Florida, which was the 5th highest abortion state in our country. North Carolina passed a 12-week abortion law. Nebraska, I mean, I could just keep going on and on. Iowa's heartbeat law, finally, we found out on Friday night, is finally going into effect. So we're seeing victories. We saw a huge victory last week, the Supreme Court with the Loper decision, the Supreme Court acknowledging that federal agencies aren't God, that the FDA can't just unilaterally get rid of all of common sense safety standards on chemical abortion and then say you can't question us because we're the FDA. That is God. So we hadn't even started thinking about all of the things, all the potential we have now. So there's so much to do, and we know even from liberal pro-abortion groups, tens of thousands of babies have been saved, have been spared death by abortion because of the fall of Roe v. Wade. But as everyone tuning in tonight knows, we are not done. We are just getting started. That's why we founded Students for Life 18 years ago, to be a post-Roe organization. We are simply getting started, but we are absolutely better off than what we were before. That is why we've gone to President Trump and we've told President Trump directly, we need a new deal. In 2016, when he was running for president, President Trump made a very clear, succinct deal with the pro-life movement that he would only appoint strict constitutionalist judges that would seriously consider the unconstitutionality of Roe versus Wade. You know, that decision that found in invisible ink in our Constitution a right to kill vulnerable babies? Yeah, he was going to appoint strict constitutionalists. And he upheld that promise. He was true to that promise. Now we need a new promise with President Trump, and that starts with a pro-life plank in the RNC platform, the Republican Party platform. It starts with President Trump saying, he's going to appoint pro-life leaders to all parts of the U.S. government, that he's going to end taxpayer subsidies for abortion vendors like Planned Parenthood. He's going to stop the weaponization of federal agencies at HHS and DOJ, the FDA, even the EPA, who we've now gone to and proven that chemical abortion drugs are in our water, because this is how chemical abortions are happening, in our toilet bowls. And then they said, oh yeah, well, we'll relook at the numbers, and I think it was 2026. We'll look at the forever chemicals to see how it's really harming animals and fish and potentially humans. We need a promise that we're going to support what we call at Students for Life fourth trimester legislation, paid family leave, expanded child tax credits, things that are actually going to help families choose life and to know that abortion doesn't have to be their only option. So there's a lot that we've got to do in the next 4 years, which is why this election in November is so critical, why we need folks to pledge to vote pro-life first, from the federal government down to their state governments, down to their local governments. But it starts with the RNC continuing to lead on life. And that's why, folks, I'm just begging you tonight, go to gopforlife.com, email your state Republican elected officials, even if you're not Republican, it doesn't matter. Email the state Republican elected officials demanding that pro-lifers keep their firm place within the Republican Party.
Absolutely. GOPforlife.com. You need to go. We've got it all set up for you. One-stop shopping. You can make your voice heard, and don't forget to go on social media, to tweet or X or whatever they call it these days. That's where you go. I know. I'll learn the words later. It's really important. I can tell you from having talked to leaders all across the country, they appreciated hearing that we still care, and we do. We want a home for our vote, and we're asking you to help make that happen. And I can tell you one last thing, because we've got some plans up our sleeve. Don't think that these ballot initiatives are going to shut down what pro-lifers can do. There's a lot that can be done, and we're making plans now. So for those who think that the pro-life movement is down and out, we are up and coming, and we're asking for your help. So go to GOPforlife.com. And thanks so much for joining us tonight. Thanks, Kristan, and thanks, Senator Lankford.